Welcome back to Just Blazor Programming. Today we're going to be discussing just how fresh this haircut is. And of course, Blazor WebAssembly Authentication Authorization, where you don't got to pay money for it. Specifically, you don't have to use Duende, which is the default that Microsoft forces you to use when you build a project through Visual Studio. So, in this video, I'll be discussing an alternative that does not let you don't have to pay an exorbitant amount of money, an exorbitant fee for Duende in order for you to have authentication authorization that is actually useful to you and use Blazor WebAssembly. So we're going to be turning over to my other screen and we're going to get started on what we're going to look at. Alrighty, so for one, before we get into the actual the Blazor WebAssembly identity stuff, don't worry, I'm going to go over it in code as well. I'm just going to give you the preamble here. Uh, Whenever I have a question of what I would like to use for Blazor, if I want to use something, I usually go to the awesome Blazor repo. Here's actually where I found this specific one. In fact, there's quite a few out here when it comes to Blazor WebAssembly, but we're going to be focusing on these two today. Specifically, this one is really the one that we're going to go in depth, but this one also piggybacks off of this repo and is based off that one. So if once you know how to use this one, you'll know how to apply it with this other one, but I'll just briefly go into it and why I'm using this other one and not this one. So with that being said, I'm not going to over that yet. Here's a Blazor with identity. So someone went out of their way and actually applied the identity server 4 to be used with Blazor WebAssembly. And this has a bunch of stars with a good MIT license, therefore you don't got to pay to use it in production. So good for you. This is good already. And I've tested it out myself and it does work. So we will be looking into that in a second. And then I'll go over exactly what the most important bits of it are. So what you have to do is get this, you got to get this repo and clone it on your end so you could have the project. And that's basically all you have to do in order to get started. But there'll be some extra things that you'll probably want to go over, and we'll go into some differences between this and let's say the one that you use for Blazor server. So let's open up the projecto. How you doing over there? You missed me? It's been a week, right? More or less. My last project. But yeah, they get harder. Even ones that are like this. So I'll be sure to put the GitHub in the description so you guys can just get it from there. But this is not one of mine. I did not make this up because, why go out of my way when this has already been used in other projects, right? So in this case, I have the Blazor WebAssembly identity stuff already good to go. I didn't do many changes to it, but I did do some changes to it in order to show off some things. So I'll just go over, what changes I did in order to make it work the way I wanted to. Number one, I added some nav links here in order to show off the policy authorization, so an authorized view. If you don't know any of what I'm talking about, go back to my Blazor server stuff. It's the same thing. So just go back to that video if you don't understand. I'm not really going to go into it too hard because I already went over it in, I think, 2 videos. So just go to that last video. I'll have it here somewhere. And you'll get the picture of how to use these things. But this is basically going to be the same, more or less the same way that you're going to apply it in there with a few differences. So one of the differences will actually be in this program.cs file. Within here, if you don't remember, in the other project, this was just called add authorization. So in order to add policies and such, you want to add them within something called add authorization core. And number two, the other caveat of this thing that you have to keep aware of is the fact that we're not using a SQL database. We're actually using SQLite. So if you don't have SQLite, you might want to download it in order for you to use this off the bat. Because if you don't have it, then you can't already play around with it. And if you want to use SQL and stuff or something like that, you have to go out of your way to use it. That's why I wanted to go over the other one, Blazor, the Blazor boilerplate, because they do this. They have both PostgreSQL and they have the normal MS SQL. But this will be fine for us to get the concepts out to show you that this does work as intended. And yes, you can use this instead of Duende. And it just boggles my mind why Microsoft has decided not to do this themselves. And, whatever. We'll go over that because we all know the reason why. Come on. Let's not kid ourselves. Anyway, in here I have I implemented one of the policies called admin policy. In fact, I did the exact same thing that we did in the other video. So if I went to the data and go to my users list, I have 2 users, test and test 2. Test 2 does not have admin privileges, but the first test does. So I went to the claims. We have one user claim, one admin claim related to one user ID, which is test. And that's all we got to do in order to test this, in order to make sure that we have the same exact privileges the same exact functionality that we would have with the other Blazor server version. So it'd be very identical, very the same. And if I were starting out a project, I would be using this first as a proof of concept. And if I need anything extra, then I'll go into that later. But I believe as a good, this has, I believe, all the functionality you need to do it. So we're just going to start this off, and then I'll go over the important bits that you have to know in order for you to understand how this individual created this. So I have an actual graph out here relating it, but I think, let's actually start this puppy off and see what we get. So I did very minor changes myself. I believe those were all the changes, except maybe I added one more Razor page. And in this case, I just added 2 people with the same password. Oh, of course. All right, here we go. So this guy is an admin. I have an admin only account here. So I actually have access to it. And there's another one here. The reason why I have 2 is because one is actually wrapped around an authorized view component and the other one is not. So it's just in case someone tries to go into admin only who's not authorized. You'll see what happens next, which is another difference between this and the other stuff, because there's just this person might have hooked a lot of the things that are necessary in order for this to work. And I'm going to go over that. But there's some things that are going to be different. There's something that you have to go out of your way to implement. I have not implemented a bunch of this stuff yet because I think that maybe that should be used for something else. Because all I'm trying to do is teach you how to use this, and then going out of your way to customize it is something that maybe should be in a different video or something. But if there's interest in it, then I'll go out of my way and do it. But right now, it's just to show you what's going on. So it's very simple. We don't have the the about page or whatever. We don't have the register page up here. We have it in some other page. And we just have the normal, WebAssembly stuff that you would have, fetch data, all this good stuff. I added these 2 things in here. And if I try to log out, I'm going to show you what happens when I try to log in with someone who does not have admin privileges, and show you some of the differences between how this handles it versus the identity stuff from Blazor server. So now this guy has no admin privileges. You see that we're missing one of the admin tabs because I wrapped it around the authorized view. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is wrapped around this bottom one called authorized view comp, and this admin only tab will go into the admin only component, which is also has a policy that you have to have an admin claim related to you. If I try to go there, this is what happens. It's not exactly what I want to happen. Obviously, I don't want to just throw you to the login page, but this was like a shortcut that this person used, and then we have to go out of our way to make this work the way we want to, say unauthorized access or something like that. And I'll show you that real quick. See, so up here, when you're not authorized within the app.razor, this is in the app.razor pop. When you're not authorized, it goes to the redirect to login, or redirect to login. All it does is redirects you to the login page. So this is how both you start off the project, which is why you start off trying to sign into the project, and then anytime that you are not authorized to something, it will just throw you here. So you have to go out of your way to add more logic to this component or iLogic here in order for you to get what you want, which is basically except for maybe the first time, then when you try to go into a page as you're unauthorized and tell them that you're unauthorized, and that's the reason why this is happening, because it doesn't make any sense. But as you can see, I was able to prove that your authorized methods or the authorized attributes work the same way as the other one did, and the way to apply them are very similar. In fact, I'm gonna go over how this works in code. So we're gonna go with high level, then go down to each file that's important for this. But the very first thing is that this is where your policies are added. And now I'm going to go into exactly how this code works. So you see there's like a bunch of files that I have here, but I'm going to go over the 4 files that are the most important when it comes to the identity server here. So I actually made a little graph. So yeah, I did a little extra work this time, just to make up for how late I was. So Here's the high level overview of the most important bits of this particular repo and how it handles identity. So when you have your login or when you try to register someone, these are actually the initiators for the process. So this is what's going to call, like, sign into a user or register a user. This is what all is happening. This is all on the client side. So, Blazor WebAssembly, you have two sides. You have the client side and you have the server side. So everything that's happening on the client side can be decompiled and all that stuff and all that security, whatever, blah, blah, blah. So keep that in mind. But here's what you have to do. As you log in or as you register, you activate the functions, right? And then through the identity authentication state provider, these have functions that are available to you. So the login and user stuff. After that, this calls the authorized API that will actually make the calls to the server through JSON, um, through HTTP, and they will make the JSON calls to the server, and then that will actually finally get you to the data through the authorized controller. So that's how, this is the basic baby way of understanding how this all works. So you go from your login and register components. There's a state provider that these components have that have the functions you need. Those functions call the authorized API that makes the JSON calls, and then those ultimately reach the controller that we're looking for on the server side. So that will actually do all the work. So we're gonna go over that real quick. So you don't have to look at the login and stuff from this, because you could tell, you just press the button and you do stuff, right? But let's just do that real quick. So here we have our provider with the login, right? So when we go to the login, it'll go into this file. And what's happening here, like, depending on whether you're logging and registering, either way, you're gonna grab the authentication state, which is gonna be your claim. So that's how the claim stuff is actually worked. They work through this method here. So you grab the claims off the user information, and then that is what gets applied throughout the state of your application. So where does the API actually do all those calls? Well, I already said that before. Oh, oops, I didn't want to do that. To the authorized API. So here is where we actually do the calls, post as JSON async. So we're actually calling the server here, and this is where all the where the data is going to be triggered. And then finally we go to the controller, where we actually start reading it off the database and stuff. So this is where all the database things happen, right on the server, as it should be. So it makes sense to me how they provide it, and I think this is a decent way of doing it. You have to do it this way because you have to keep in mind of the Blazor WebAssembly is different than Blazor Server. You can't just do it all in one place. You have to go out of your way to make sure you demarcate between the client and the server. And this is one way of doing it, to make sure all the information, all the data stuff happens on the server and then gets brought back up. You do validation maybe here and there in order to make sure that no one's doing anything funny on the front end. And you have to do validation in the back end to make sure that things make sense. But the identity server handles a lot of that for you. So, you get everything you need. Has it can do login, register, and log out. So the way that I actually applied my claims, I did it directly into the SQL. Keep in mind that when you do use this within SQLite, you cannot have this running and this running at the same time. If you want to make changes, one can make changes or the other one can, but not both at the same time. So if you want to make changes directly here, you can through the execute SQL stuff. You want to do it that way, or if you want to manually add it. I did it through the SQL way because that's what I'm used to, and it's just what I like doing. But the tables here are basically the exact same tables you would see in the Blazor server through the migration stuff. And yes, unfortunately, this is just how the default project is, and you have to go out of your way to turn it into a proper SQL database if you want to use Microsoft SQL Server or something. But it works pretty well for what it is. It has everything you need, and it does and then it grabs the claims, grabs the users, it registers the users, and you could still use all the components and things that you find in Blazor as you would use it in Blazor server. So doing that little example proved to me that it worked the way I expected it to work. So it's actually not that complicated. All you have to do is remember the four main files. login and register. So wherever they are, whatever the two files are, and then the state provider, the authorized API, and then the authorized controller. Those are the main things you should keep in mind when using this, and that is how you do the flow of the identity authentication authorization pieces. And your authorization happens as you would do it in Blazor server, which is through the data attributes and the authorized view components. So here we have an authorized view component based on the policy, and in my admin only component we have an attribute for that as well. So your authorization stuff happens in the exact same way as Blazor server. And when it comes to the author authentication and grabbing all the data, it's a little bit different, but it's very similar and follows this flow instead of all in one, basically. So why do I? So we have a pretty decent basic repo that gives you the ability to use Blazor WASM identity authentication authorization without paying for Duende. And that's awesome. There's another repo called Blazor Boilerplate that I was trying to play with, but unfortunately I couldn't really get this to work because I had issues with it. I don't know what was wrong with it, but I didn't want to spend all my time trying to fix the issues I was having. But just letting you know that in theory, this would be a pretty good thing to have, because what they boast is that they're able to use Blazor server and Blazor WebAssembly, and you can switch between the two depending on the hosting line or whatever. And it already has within it Mud Blazor and also Identity Server 4 for Blazor WebAssembly and the normal identity for Blazor server. So I really wanted for this to work, and it has like a bunch of other stuff in it too. But that also means there's a lot more problems and a lot of more things can go wrong, as in my case, where I think I have a localization problem with the localization file or something, and I'm not sure what's going on. Also, there's a lot of bloat to it. If you don't need Postgres, then that's too bad, because you have Postgres in this project. Um, it's meant to be a boilerplate as such, so it's meant to, cast its net wide, but maybe for a small project is maybe too big. But I did wanted to make this work, and if I can't figure it out, that'll be sad. But I would like to, show it off because it looked pretty interesting as a nice starting point for a lot of projects. So the thing I was actually using was this Blazor with Identity by Stavros Skazidis. Whenever you look at repos like this, you want to look at the stars and the license. And obviously, you want to try it out before you actually do anything serious with it. So that's what I did here. I think it worked just fine. And it's unfortunate that the Blazor Boiler one, with 1.6K stars with the same MIT license, I couldn't get it to work. I'll try it again and see. But if not, then I'm probably going to move on. As for our little project here, all you have to do in order to get similar to results to me as well, you could add the attribute stuff wherever you want. And in your program, if you want to add the policies, add them like this, just like you would in Blazor server. And you can use your authorized view the exact same way. So nothing really changes here. The only thing you have to know is exactly how this does all that, the actual identity flow. So how you get claims is really important to know, and how you go from executing the login from the client side to the server side, that flow of data, because you're going to have to be following that as you build your project. You have to do that flow that I showed earlier, basically with any call you want to make to the server. So Blazor WebAssembly Identity Server 4 is a pretty decent alternative to obviously Duende. Number one, you don't got to pay for a license. And number two, you already have a project that's basically ready to go, a nice startup project that you can manipulate if you want to. And there's a bigger project that should work. I couldn't get it to work, so that's my confession there. But in theory, this has a lot more things you could add to your project off the bat, including Mud Blazor and Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly's authentication authorization models already prepared for you without having to have a license to do so. And if you ever do feel that you want some information that you don't have, or or you have a question for something Blazor related, you can try going to the repo and see if someone else has already done this. There's actually a few other authentication models here for Blazor WebAssembly specifically. So I haven't tried gRPC yet. I haven't tried these yet, but they look pretty promising, and they're for OAuth and auth 0 stuff. So that'd be pretty cool. And there's a lot more things in this repo. But for now, the most simplest way of implementing identity is actually by getting this repo, Blazor with identity, or trying to follow what it did. The only caveat that I don't like is the fact that it starts with SQLite. I understand why, because it's meant to be a light project. It's meant to, to be like a minimum viable product, maybe to show off something. But you do have to go out of your way to implement other databases to it, especially when implementing something like SQL. And that kind of sucks, because then that's a lot more work. But you do have the authentication authorization piece ready to go for you. So, it's a bit of a trade-off. However, I believe that is it for the Blazor WebAssembly and identity model. I'm glad that I didn't have to do too much work for this particular thing, but I did have to try it out, and I did struggle with the Blazor boilerplate stuff. So if you got that working, let me know in the Discord or in the comment section, because I would love to try that out for myself. So I can't really endorse that other one. I can endorse this one. This one seems pretty decent, and the actual architecture seems solid. So that's all there is today. Thank you very much for waiting for this video. I don't know if you want something else, another Blazor WebAssembly authentication authorization model, or something else with Blazor WebAssembly. You just let me know. So, anyways, see you later. Peace out.